The Vietnam War was never fought on a clean battlefield. It unfolded inside a living, breathing labyrinth, humid, restless, and filled with eyes that watched from the dark. Long before bullets cracked through the canopy, something far older stalked the Americans who stepped into that green world. Veterans would later say the jungle felt alive, as if it judged every intruder. And sometimes it killed them before the enemy ever fired a shot. What most people never hear about is the other war. The war against creatures that didn't care about politics, uniforms, or strategy. In the military's own medical archives, these animals left a trail of casualties so real that some units quietly admitted losing men to wildlife at rates that rivaled small arms fire. This wasn't superstition, it was survival. Imagine standing night guard, boots sinking into wet soil, the air thick with the smell of rotting leaves and cordite. You think the danger is out there, hiding among Viet Cong sappers. But something else is studying you. Something silent, something patient. Soldiers who served there will feel the memory rising already, the primitive instinct that tightens your breath when the darkness feels too close. Among the most feared was a predator that moved without sound, leaving only a flash of stripes and a final scream. Indo-Chinese tigers still ruled Vietnam's forests in the 1960s and 70s, massive beasts stretching nearly 3 meters long and weighing as much as a heavy machine gun team. Rumors about tiger attacks weren't just barracks gossip. Official reports confirmed that these ambush hunters struck from behind, clamping jaws around necks and dragging men into the blackness before anyone could react. In one marine incident, a nighttime listening post exploded into screams so raw they froze nearby troops in place. When the squad rushed in with red-lensed flashlights, they found only torn foliage, blood, and the body of a Marine whose head and throat had been crushed with terrifying force. The tracks around him told the rest of the story. A large cat, unbothered by gunfire, had come and gone like a ghost. For the rest of the night, those Marines fortified their perimeter against an enemy no claymore mine could truly stop. Long after that attack, the fear lingered. Men described the sensation of being watched by something they could never fully see, only hear, faintly, through the jungle's breath. A low, sawing call drifting through the night became a sound no one ever forgot. It cut through the hum of insects and distant artillery like a warning from another world. Even hardened Marines admitted that tiger vocalizations triggered a deeper terror than incoming mortars. The Viet Cong might strike with intention. The tiger struck because hunger told it to. Defensive planning at fire bases near dense jungle had to account for these predators. Perimeter guards were told to scan not only for sappers crawling under the wire, but for a 400-pound hunter capable of leaping the barrier in a single bound. Soldiers lit more flares than they should have, fired at shadows more often than they admitted, and learned that the jungle didn't need the enemy's help to kill them. Yet the tiger was only one chapter in this silent war. Push deeper into the undergrowth, and another threat waited. Shorter, stockier, but just as explosive. Vietnamese wild boars were nothing like the pink farm animals Americans knew from home. These were armored missiles of muscle and fury, some weighing well over 130 kilograms, armed with tusks honed to a lethal edge. Patrols that stumbled into a boar's territory often had no warning, just the violent crack of brush before a dark shape charged like a living battering ram. Daytime encounters were bad enough, but nighttime ones were far worse. Boars were nocturnal, restless, and utterly indifferent to the presence of armed men. Units setting up listening posts sometimes discovered too late they were sitting in the center of a boar's nightly path. Soldiers faced an impossible choice: fire and compromise the entire mission, or stay still and pray the animal didn't view them as an obstacle. In more than one documented case, boars stormed through defensive perimeters, triggering panicked bursts of gunfire that echoed across valleys. Troops thought they were repelling a sapper assault, only to find torn foliage and hoof marks instead of enemy bodies. The noise alone was enough to alert nearby Viet Cong units, an accidental signal flare in the deadly chess game of jungle warfare. But even the tiger's stealth and the boar's brute force couldn't match the eerie unpredictability of another creature, the so-called rock apes. Soldiers gave them that name, partly in frustration, partly in disbelief. These primates were nothing like the small, nervous monkeys tourists imagined. They were larger, more muscular, and terrifyingly bold. Some were macaques, others something less clearly identified, and some, well, veterans still argue about what they saw. In the highlands especially, patrols reported being bombarded from the treetops with rocks, branches, and anything else the apes could rip free. A stone dropped from 15 meters above didn't just sting. It could split a scalp, break a collarbone, or knock a man unconscious. Troops advancing up steep slopes sometimes found themselves ducking a rain of debris, unable to fire back without revealing their position. Yet the most unnerving encounters weren't the attacks from above. They were the times the apes came into camp. Night after night, silhouettes moved at the edge of the perimeter. Food disappeared. Equipment was torn apart. Soldiers awoke to guttural screams in the dark, sounds too deep for known macaques, too loud to dismiss as imagination. Some accounts describe creatures standing upright, far taller than any primate cataloged in the region. Were they misidentifications, shadows playing tricks, or something else the jungle kept hidden? The archives don't answer those questions. What they do confirm is this: American forces suffered injuries, lost rations, and experienced mission disruptions because of aggressive primates that refused to fear them. But the rivers held an even deadlier kind of predator. American riverine units, patrol boat crews, SEAL teams, engineers, and infantry crossing waterways learned quickly that Vietnam's estuaries were ruled by giants. Soldiers called them alligators, but these were estuary crocodiles, ancient beasts capable of growing longer than a truck and weighing more than a small car. Their method was always the same: stay invisible, wait, and strike with bone-shattering force. One Brownwater Navy report describes a patrol boat cruising at dusk when a massive shadow rose from beneath the surface. A crewman leaning over the gunwale never saw the jaws until they clamped around his arm, nearly dragging him into the river. Only frantic gunfire forced the crocodile to release him. In other incidents, soldiers crossing shallow rivers suddenly vanished beneath the water, pulled down so fast their comrades never even saw the attacker. The worst part was the silence. No ripple, no warning, just the sudden realization that the river was not water. It was a hunting ground. For men who had grown up beside predictable lakes and streams, Vietnam's waterways felt like thresholds to another world, one ruled entirely by creatures older than human memory. The water smelled of mud, decay, and hidden movement. Every crossing became a ritual of fear. Soldiers fired bursts into the murk, hoping the vibrations would scare anything lurking below. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Those who survived crocodile attacks rarely returned unchanged. Medics described wounds that looked less like bites and more like explosions, flesh torn open, bones crushed as if made of chalk. A crocodile's jaws exerted thousands of pounds of pressure, turning limbs into mangled ruin in a heartbeat. Some victims died on the riverbank before evacuation could arrive, the jungle heat mingling with the metallic scent of blood as their units waited helplessly. Yet, even the river's monsters didn't create as much sustained terror as something smaller, colder, and infinitely more insidious. The Kraits. These snakes slithered into soldiers' nightmares because they embodied everything the jungle taught. Death often came quietly. Banded Kraits and Malayan Kraits hunted mostly at night, the same hours American units listened for enemy footsteps, the same hours they lay motionless in the dark. A Krait's venom didn't just kill, it shut the body down piece by piece, paralyzing limbs, then lungs, all while the victim remained fully conscious. Some soldiers didn't even know they'd been bitten. The initial sting was so faint, it vanished beneath the sweat and humidity. Hours later, numbness crept into fingers, then arms, then the chest. Medics watched men struggle to breathe, unable to move, eyes wide with the horrible understanding that their bodies were shutting off like fading lanterns. Without immediate antivenom and respiratory support, resources often impossible to deliver in a firefight, death arrived methodically, silently. Worse still, Kraits didn't respect boundaries. They slid into tents, crawled into boots, and coiled beneath sleeping soldiers. More than one man woke unable to speak or lift his rifle, realizing too late what had brushed against him in the night. Veteran accounts describe the terror of lying in the dark, feeling something move against your leg, knowing you couldn't risk shining a light. The jungle was teaching them a brutal truth. In Vietnam, the line between predator and environment was blurred beyond recognition. And still, the jungle had more weapons to unveil. Creatures that didn't stalk like tigers or strike like snakes, but instead crawled, climbed, and slipped silently into every gap the war opened. Vietnam's giant centipedes were among the most disturbing. Some stretched nearly a foot long, armored in glossy plates that glistened like wet metal under flashlight beams. Their movements were unnervingly fast, an insectoid blur that vanished into clothing folds or boot seams before a soldier could react. And their venom delivered a pain that defied language. Medics tried to describe it in reports, but veterans' testimonies capture it best. A bite that felt like fire injected directly into the bone. One soldier wrote that the pain from a centipede bite made him forget he was in a firefight. The swelling was immediate, grotesque. Limbs ballooned to twice their size, skin stretched tight as drum leather. And infection lurked behind everything in Vietnam. Soil, water, equipment, even sweat carried bacteria. A centipede bite could become an open gateway to days or weeks of agony. Yet medevacs for such injuries were rare. Commanders couldn't burn precious helicopters on non-lethal wounds. So soldiers marched, patrolled, fought, carrying rifles in one hand and a throbbing, venom-inflamed limb in the other. Night operations were even worse. Lying in an ambush line, forbidden to move or speak, a soldier might feel something slender crawl across his neck. He couldn't flinch, couldn't swat, couldn't illuminate it. He simply had to hope it moved on. If it didn't, the bite came, sharp, electric, and the mission unraveled in a silent convulsion of pain. But centipedes weren't alone in this creeping assault. Spiders, large, hairy, heavy-bodied, claimed the jungle as their own. They dropped from branches like living grenades, legs splayed wide, clinging to uniforms and bare skin with unnerving weight. Soldiers emerged from thick brush coated in spiders, their helmets and shoulders crawling with eight-legged shapes. Even harmless encounters rattled nerves. The aggressive species pushed men past their breaking point. Their bites caused swelling, fever, and sometimes infections that spread in angry red streaks up the veins. The psychological toll was worse. Imagine unzipping your sleeping bag to find a spider the size of your palm inside. Imagine shaking out your boots and watching 3 of them spill into the mud. That level of stress doesn't fade. It accumulates day after day, tightening the mind like a winch. But among all the crawling terrors, nothing matched the ever-present, slow-motion agony delivered by Vietnam's snakes. Cobras, pit vipers, bamboo vipers, names whispered among patrols like curses. Snake bites weren't rare accidents. They were daily events, recorded again and again in medical logs across the entire theater of war. Some battalions tallied multiple bites in a single week, as routine as twisted ankles or heat exhaustion. The danger was embedded in every movement. A hand reaching for a tree root, a step through thick brush, a knee touching the ground during a moment's rest. Any of these could end with fangs sinking into flesh. The bamboo viper, small but vicious, blended perfectly with moss and leaves. The cobra, coiled beneath rotting logs, could strike with terrifying speed. And then there were the silent ones, snakes that didn't rattle, warn, or hiss, but simply appeared in the corner of a soldier's vision a split second before the bite. Writers like Philip Capito and Harold Moore didn't dramatize this danger. They simply reported it. Medics fighting to keep airways open during the Ia Drung campaign. Soldiers immobilized by venom while the battle raged around them. Commanders losing men not to enemy ambushes, but to a creature whose entire body weighed less than a canteen. But the venom wasn't the only enemy. There were the leeches. Not the harmless water bugs many imagined, but fat, swollen parasites that dropped from leaves or clung to boots in writhing clusters. After a march through wet ground, soldiers stripped down, only to discover dozens, sometimes hundreds, attached to their skin. They fed silently, swelling with blood until they looked like glossy black grapes. Some burrowed into armpits. Others clung to groins, inner thighs, the soft skin behind knees, the places soldiers least wanted to find them. And removing them wasn't simple. If a soldier ripped a leech off too quickly, the head could remain embedded like a tiny barbed hook, festering into infection. Burning them off worked, but left open wounds in an environment saturated with bacteria. Men joked to stay sane, but the truth gnawed at them. The jungle was feeding on them, sip by sip. Even seasoned veterans felt the psychological rot this caused. There were patrols where leeches soaked through socks, leaving bloody stains that spread with every step. Cases of anemia appeared in long-range units, men literally drained of strength by thousands of tiny mouths. Every patrol became a trade, progress through enemy territory at the price of your own blood. And yet, leeches were still not the deadliest insect threat. That title belonged to something almost too small to see: mosquitoes. In the Vietnam War, mosquitoes weren't an inconvenience. They were a weaponized force of nature, invisible, relentless, and everywhere. They struck without sound, without warning, and without mercy. A single bite could lay a soldier flat for weeks or kill him outright. And unlike an ambush or a mortar attack, there was no perimeter to defend, no strategy to counter them. The jungle itself carried them like drifting clouds of disease. Malaria was the most feared. It didn't announce itself. One day, a soldier marched through the brush, drenched in sweat, rifle steady. The next, he shivered uncontrollably, teeth rattling as fever spiked high enough to blur vision. Some men collapsed mid-patrol. Others grew delirious, unable to distinguish friend from enemy. Over 80,000 American troops officially contracted malaria during the war, and that number doesn't count the unreported cases that quietly drained units of manpower. Then there was dengue fever, breakbone fever, troops called it, because it made every muscle feel fractured. Men curled into the fetal position, groaning through pain so sharp it felt like their bones were being twisted apart. No cure, no special treatment, just the long, agonizing wait until the fever decided to break, or didn't. The anti-malarial pills the military issued were their own torment. Chloroquine primaquine pounded soldiers with nightmares, nausea, and hallucinations so vivid that some refused to take them. They were stuck choosing between two miseries: the medicine that poisoned their sleep, or the mosquito bite that might poison their blood. More than one soldier gambled wrong. And the worst part? You couldn't escape them. Night brought the highest danger. When patrols froze in the dark, listening for enemy movement, they felt the mosquitoes needle their necks, wrists, and faces. Without nets or smoke, bites multiplied by the minute. Even the lightest exposed skin became a landing strip for disease. In the still air of ambush positions, men could hear them. Not a buzz, but a faint, collective whine. A sound that meant sickness was already on its way. Mosquitoes infiltrated bunkers, tents, command posts. Nets tore. Repellent washed off in sweat. Uniforms were no armor. One veteran joked that the only real defense was to stop bleeding and become less delicious. But behind the humor was a simple truth. The smallest creatures in Vietnam took a greater toll on American forces than many firefights. And through all of this, one understanding hardened in every soldier's mind. The enemy wasn't just the Viet Cong. The jungle itself was waging a war against them. As the months ground on, soldiers began to understand that Vietnam was not a battlefield. It was an ecosystem actively hostile to human survival. The Viet Cong could be outmaneuvered. Booby traps, at least, followed predictable logic. But the creatures of the jungle were chaotic, ancient, indifferent. They struck when they wanted, how they wanted, and no training manual truly prepared men for that kind of warfare. Ask a veteran what made Vietnam different from other conflicts, and many won't speak first about firefights or ambushes. They'll talk about the constant vigilance, the way every rustle of leaves could be a snake, every dark patch of water a crocodile, every hollow log a nest of spiders, and every step a gamble. The jungle didn't sleep. Even in secure fire bases, even behind sandbags and razor wire, the war seeped inward. Tigers prowled beyond the perimeter. Boars crashed through the underbrush. Apes screamed from the canopy. Snakes slipped through cracks in the flooring. Mosquitoes and leeches bled men dry from within. No moment was truly safe. Not dawn, not dusk, not the sacred hours when a soldier tried to close his eyes and forget the world for a few stolen minutes. This relentless pressure carved deep into the psyche. Men described a specific kind of exhaustion, something beyond fatigue, a weight pressing on the spirit, a raw animal alertness, A sense that the jungle was an adversary with intentions, watching, testing, punishing carelessness. Even battle-hardened troops admitted that this psychological attrition was sometimes worse than enemy contact. Those who served in long-range reconnaissance patrols, LRPs, felt it most intensely. They slipped through the terrain for days, sometimes weeks, far from support, surrounded by creatures that viewed them as prey, intruders, or simply obstacles. They learned to move without brushing low branches, to probe the ground with their rifle tips, to scan treetops for falling rocks, to check boots, canteens, and helmets before every use. Rituals of survival practiced with religious devotion. And yet, even the most cautious patrol could not avoid every trial the jungle presented. Men returned from missions gaunt, eyes sunken, uniforms torn and stained with mud, blood, and insect bites. Some carried snake venom scars. Others bore the ragged marks of boar tusks or crocodile teeth. Many limped from infected wounds caused by leeches or spiders. But all of them carried something invisible, the memory of walking through an environment that felt alive and hungry. The war stories in textbooks rarely mention this part. They talk about strategy, geopolitics, and troop movements. But to understand Vietnam, to truly grasp the weight American soldiers carried, you must understand the invisible war that wrapped around them like a second skin. A war where the jungle itself became the enemy. In the end, what terrified soldiers most wasn't a single creature, but the realization that the jungle offered no escape. Even when the gunfire slowed, even when the terrain seemed quiet, nature continued its silent assault. A soldier could brace himself for a firefight, he could plan for an ambush, but he could never fully prepare for the moment something brushed against his neck in the dark, or the sudden sting on his ankle, or the sound of heavy breathing just beyond the perimeter wire. This constant uncertainty reshaped the human mind. Many veterans later admitted that the fear of the jungle, its fangs, its venom, its crawling multitudes, was more haunting than engagements with the Viet Cong. Because the creatures that hunted them didn't retreat. They didn't negotiate. They didn't misfire or hesitate. They simply obeyed the laws of survival. Tigers dragged men into the night without a whisper. Boars charged blindly through the dark, ripping flesh before a soldier could raise his rifle. Apes hurled rocks from unseen branches. Crocodiles pulled men into black water, leaving behind only ripples. Snakes slipped into boots, tents, and sleeping bags, silent, patient, lethal. Leeches drank from soldiers until their bodies weakened. Mosquitoes carried fevers far deadlier than shrapnel. Spiders and centipedes turned sleep into a brutal ritual of fear. And through it all, the jungle wrapped around American forces like a predator circling its prey, slow, methodical, unrelenting. This is why veterans often say the war never truly left them, not because of politics, not because of tactics, but because Vietnam invaded their senses, sight, sound, touch, even breath. It embedded itself in their memories the way humidity clings to skin, the kind of experience that rewires the human nervous system. To truly understand the Vietnam War, you must understand this hidden front. Not just the battles recorded in official histories, but the daily, grinding conflict with a landscape designed by evolution to test every weakness. A world where danger whispered from treetops, crawled beneath clothing, lurked underwater, or watched through the glowing eyes of nocturnal predators. This isn't myth. It isn't exaggeration. Every creature described here appears in military records, after-action reports, veteran memoirs, and historical archives. They killed. They maimed. They broke morale. They shaped operations. And they left psychological scars that time has never completely erased. Because in Vietnam, survival wasn't just about outsmarting an enemy force. It was about enduring a jungle that seemed determined to swallow every outsider who dared step into its shadow.